The ancient ruins of Keth Prime stretched endlessly across the dead planet's surface, their crystalline spires reaching toward blood-red skies. Commander Velthar of the Zephyrian Empire walked through the excavation site, his 4 arms clasped. Behind his back, as dozens of worker drones cleared debris from what appeared to be the galaxy's largest data archive. 3,000 years of silence, he murmured, watching as another massive crystal was carefully extracted from the rubble. What secrets did you take to your graves, Vorthak? The Vorthak had once ruled a quarter of the galaxy, before vanishing overnight. No war, no plague, no natural disaster could explain their sudden disappearance. They had simply stopped existing, leaving behind empty worlds and these haunting crystal libraries. Elder Mordan approached, his ancient form moving slowly across the excavation platform. The old scholar's bioluminescent patches flickered weakly with age, and his sensory tendrils drooped with exhaustion. He had spent weeks deciphering the alien language, poring over countless records of Vorthak history. "Commander," Mordan wheezed, "I have translated the final archive, the one they sealed in their deepest vaults." Velthar's interest sparked. The Zephyrians had found thousands of crystals containing art, science, and philosophy, but the deepest vaults had been sealed with warnings in every known language. Whatever the Vorthak had hidden there, they desperately wanted it to stay buried. "Show me," Velthar commanded. They descended into the excavation's depths, past layers of automated defenses that had long since powered down. The final chamber was vast, dominated by a single black crystal the size of a starship. Unlike the others, this one pulsed with its own inner light, casting shifting shadows on the walls. Mordan placed his translation device against the crystal's surface. Ancient symbols flowed across its face as the Vorthak's final message began to play in their own language, then shifted to universal translation codes. "Emergency archive, final entry," the crystal announced in the flat tone of automated systems. "Civilization designation Vorthak Empire. Archive date, cycle 2847 of the New Dawn. Status, critical extinction protocol activated." Velthar leaned forward. This was it, the answer to one of the galaxy's greatest mysteries. The crystal continued. "We record this warning for any species that might discover our remains. We were the masters of 7,000 worlds, our fleets numbered in the millions. We believed ourselves untouchable, eternal, supreme among the stars." Images flowed from the crystal, vast Vorthak cities, massive space stations, armadas that darkened entire star systems. The Vorthak had been magnificent, their technology far beyond what even the Zephyrians had achieved. "We were wrong," the recording continued. "From the outer rim, from a small blue world in the third spiral arm, came the hunters. We called them the Endless Ones, for they never stopped coming. We called them those who never yield, for they could not be broken." Elder Mordan's tendrils began trembling. "Commander, this matches the other fragments we found. References to something called the persistent species appear in dozens of their military records." The crystal's images shifted, showing primitive bipedal creatures, humans, though the Vorthak had labeled them only as species classification, extinction vector. "They are not like us," the Vorthak warning continued. "They do not conquer for resources or territory. They do not seek to rule or to subjugate. When threatened, they become something else entirely. They become hunters, and they hunt until nothing remains of their prey." Velthar clicked his mandibles in amusement. These primitive bipeds? Look at them. No natural weapons, no armor, no advanced technology. How could such pathetic creatures threaten a galactic empire? But Mordan was studying the tactical displays that accompanied the images. "Commander, according to this, the humans started with simple chemical rockets and basic firearms. Within 50 years of first contact, they were building ships that could match Vorthak technology. Within a century, they were improving upon it." "Impossible," Velthar scoffed. "No species advances that quickly." The crystal seemed to respond to his disbelief. New images appeared, human colonies spreading across Vorthak space like wildfire. Human ships built from captured technology, but modified in ways the Vorthak had never imagined. The humans didn't just copy Vorthak designs, they made them better. They learned, the recording explained. Every weapon we used against them, they turned back upon us within cycles. Every defense we developed, they found ways to bypass within rotations. They do not fight as we fight. They fight as their ancient ancestors hunted the great beasts of their homeworld, with patience, intelligence, and absolute determination. The final images were horrifying. Vorthak, worlds burning. Evacuation fleets fleeing into deep space, only to find human ships waiting for them. The proud Vorthak Empire reduced to scattered refugees, then to isolated survivors, then to nothing at all. We tried to negotiate, the crystal continued. They would not listen. We tried to surrender. They would not accept. We tried to flee beyond the galactic rim. They followed us into the void itself. In the end, we realized the truth. They were not fighting a war. They were conducting an extinction, and they were very, very good at it. Elder Morden stepped back from the crystal, his bioluminescent patches flickering with fear. Commander, the final entry mentions their current location. The humans still occupy that blue world in the third spiral arm, Sector 7739, Velthars. Amusement faded as he realized the implications. Sector 7739 was next on their expansion list. The Zephyrian High Command had already identified several primitive species there for conquest or enslavement, including the humans of the blue world. Primitive superstition, he muttered, but his voice lacked conviction. We have conquered 47 species across 2 spiral arms. We are the Zephyrian Empire. What could possibly threaten us? Morden touched the crystal one final time. Commander, they specifically mention creatures from a blue world in the third spiral arm. The warning is quite clear. Never wake the humans. Never threaten their young. Never attack their homes. Because if you do, they will hunt you across the galaxy itself until you are extinct. Enough! Velthar spun away from the crystal, his military pride overwhelming his growing unease. I will not be frightened by the ghost stories of a dead civilization. The Vorthak were weak, or they would still exist. We are not weak. He activated his communication device. Fleet Command. This is Velthar. Begin preparations for expansion. Into Sector 7739. Full conquest protocols. I want those systems under Zephyrian control within the next rotation. As Velthar strode from the chamber, Elder Morden remained behind, watching the ancient crystal's warning glow fade into darkness. Somewhere in the depths of space, human ships moved between their worlds, unaware that another empire had marked them for conquest. The old scholar's hearts were heavy with dread as he whispered the final line of the Vorthak warning. We ignored the signs. We dismissed the warnings. Now we are gone and they remain. Learn from our extinction. Never wake the humans. But his words echoed uselessly in the empty chamber, another warning that would go unheeded. The alarm bells of the colony. Ship. New Busan screamed through every corridor as Captain Hansol sprinted toward the bridge. Behind him, families rushed through the metal hallways carrying their children and whatever possessions they could grab. This was supposed to be their new home, a peaceful farming colony on the edge of human space where they could build a better life. Captain on deck, Lieutenant Yujin called out as Hansol burst through the bridge doors, her fingers already flying across the sensor controls. The main view screen showed 17 massive alien vessels, dropping out of hyperspace in perfect formation, their dark hulls bristling with weapons that could vaporize the colony ship in seconds. Status report, Hansol barked, sliding into his command chair as the bridge crew worked frantically around him. 17 vessels, Captain. Each one is 3 times our size, Yujin replied, sweat beading on her forehead. They're broadcasting on all frequencies, demanding our immediate surrender. They want us to power down weapons and prepare for boarding, Hansol studied the alien formation on the tactical display. The ships moved with precise military discipline, maintaining perfect spacing as they surrounded the human colony. Their design was unlike anything in Earth's databases, sleek predatory shapes that seemed to cut through space itself. Colonel Min Ho, the colony's military advisor, pointed to the alien positioning. Standard intimidation pattern, Captain. Classic. Overwhelming force doctrine. They expect us to take one look at their fleet and give up without firing a shot. The communication system crackled as an alien voice filled the bridge. The translation software struggled with the harsh, clicking language before converting it to standard human speech. "Primitive species of the third spiral arm," the alien commander announced. "I am Velthar of the Zephyrian Empire. You are now subjects of the Empire. Surrender your vessels immediately or face destruction. You have one of your time units to comply." Han Sol looked around his bridge at the faces of his crew. These weren't soldiers. They were farmers, engineers, teachers, and shopkeepers who had volunteered for colony duty. But in their eyes, he saw something the aliens clearly didn't expect. Instead of fear, he saw anger. Instead of submission, he saw determination. "1 hour to surrender," Han Sol said quietly. Then he smiled, and it wasn't a pleasant expression. "Then they don't know humans very well. Min Ho, implement protocol. 7, you Jin, get me Chief Engineer So Young on the comm." Protocol 7 wasn't in any military manual. It was something the colonists had developed during training, a desperate contingency plan for exactly this situation. If they couldn't run and couldn't hide, they would make the enemy pay for every inch of space. Chief Engineer So Young appeared on screen from the engine room, her coveralls already stained with grease and her tool belt loaded with improvised weapons. "Captain, I heard the announcement. How long do we have?" 57 minutes to turn a colony ship into a warship," Han Sol replied. "Can you do it?" So Young grinned fiercely. "Watch me, Captain. I've got 600 mining charges in Cargo Bay 3 and a whole lot of anger to work with." Across the ship, the colonists transformed from frightened refugees into something far more dangerous. The farmers who had planned to grow crops on New Terra instead planted explosive charges throughout the ship's hull. The teachers who had brought educational supplies, jury-rigged communication devices into jamming equipment. The engineers who had designed irrigation systems rewired cargo haulers into makeshift missile platforms. In the machine shops, workers welded steel plates over vital systems while others modified their mining equipment into weapons. The colony ship hadn't been built for war, but humans had a talent for making anything into a weapon when their families were threatened. "Incoming transmission from the alien fleet," Eugen announced as the deadline approached. Commander Velthar appeared on screen, his forearms gesturing impatiently while his mandibles clicked with annoyance. "Your time is expired, primitives. Prepare to be boarded. Resistance will result in termination." Han Sol stood up from his command chair, straightening his simple colony uniform. Behind him, his bridge crew worked at their stations with calm efficiency. "This is Captain Han Sol of the human colony ship New Busan. You want to board our ship? Come and take it." The alien's expression shifted to something that might have been surprise. Clearly, the Zephyrians were used to immediate surrender from the species they encountered. "You dare defy the Empire?" Velthar snarled. "We have conquered 47 worlds. Your primitive vessel cannot stand against our fleet." "Maybe not," Han Sol replied calmly, "but we're going to try anyway, because that's what humans do." The first alien boarding pods launched like bullets from the Zephyrian ships, their hull cutting, lasers already charging. But instead of piercing empty metal, they hit the steel plates the colonists had welded over every critical system. Instead of finding helpless civilians, they encountered farmers armed with mining charges and a deep-seated fury at having their dreams of peace shattered. The battle erupted across 17 different fronts as more Zephyrian ships moved in. The modified cargo haulers launched their improvised missiles, not sophisticated weapons, but containers packed with industrial explosives and guided by the same navigation systems used for supply deliveries. Several Zephyrian vessels rocked under the unexpected impacts. In the corridors of the New Busan, hand-to-hand combat raged as Zephyrian soldiers met human colonists who fought with tools, kitchen knives, and improvised weapons. The aliens had advanced armor and energy weapons, but the humans had something else entirely. They were fighting for their families, their future, and their right to exist. Chief Engineer So Young turned the ship's main reactor into a weapon, overloading power systems to create feedback loops that fried alien electronics when they tried to interface with human technology. Her modified mining charges detonated in carefully timed sequences, creating chaos in the alien boarding formations. The battle lasted 3 days. The Zephyrians eventually won through sheer overwhelming force, but it wasn't the easy victory they had expected. When the last human resistance finally fell silent, Commander Veltar stood on the bridge of the captured colony ship, staring at casualty reports that made no sense. 40% of his boarding troops were dead or wounded. 2 of his escort ships had suffered critical damage from improvised weapons that shouldn't have been able to penetrate their armor. His fleet's casualties from conquering a single unarmed colony ship were higher than their losses from the last. 3 worlds combined. How? He whispered, looking at the bodies of human colonists who had fought to the very end. These weren't trained soldiers. They were families seeking a peaceful life in space. Yet they had fought like warriors, turning their farming tools into weapons and their children's toys into improvised explosives. Elder Mordan's warnings echoed in his mind as he realized the truth. The humans hadn't just been defending their ship. They had been learning, adapting, studying Zephyrian tactics and technology even as they died. Every boarding action had been recorded, every weapon studied, every weakness catalogued. And somewhere in the darkness of space, other human ships would be waiting to receive those recordings. 2 weeks after the bloody conquest of the new Busan, Commander Velthar's fleet limped through space toward Zerion Station, like wounded animals seeking shelter. The massive orbital facility hung in the void ahead of them, its docking bays and repair facilities promising relief from the nightmare their easy victory had become. Velthar stood on the bridge of his flagship, the Dominion's Edge, watching. His damaged vessels struggled to maintain formation. Hull breaches sealed with emergency patches dotted their surfaces like scars. Several ships were running on auxiliary power, their main systems still recovering from the humans' improvised electromagnetic weapons that had somehow overloaded Zephyrian technology. Medical bays report 734 casualties. "Commander," his aide reported with trembling voice. "Engineering estimates 2 months for full repairs to the fleet, 700 casualties from conquering a single unarmed colony ship." The number haunted Velthar. In their conquest of the Kelari Empire, they had lost fewer troops, taking 17 worlds. These humans had been farmers and teachers, not soldiers, yet they had fought with a ferocity that defied explanation. "At least it's over," Velthar muttered, watching Zerion Station grow larger on the view screen. Soon they would dock, repair their ships, and report back to High Command. The humans of Sector 7739 had proven more troublesome than expected, but they were extinct now. The colony ship had been their only vessel in the region. Communications Officer Zalbeth suddenly straightened at her station, her sensory organs flaring with alarm. "Commander, I'm detecting multiple hyperspace signatures. Something's coming out of jump behind us." "Impossible," Velthar snapped. Long-range sensors showed no pursuit. The humans had no other ships in this system. But even as he spoke, the space behind his fleet began to ripple and tear. Hyperspace windows opened like wounds in reality, and through them came vessels that made Velthar's blood run cold. They were clearly human in basic design. He recognized the angular construction and efficient lines, but they had been transformed into something else entirely. Sleek, predatory shapes emerged from hyperspace, their hulls gleaming with modifications that incorporated stolen Zephyrian technology. Weapon arrays that looked suspiciously similar to his own fleet's armaments had been mounted along their sides, but with modifications that made them appear somehow more efficient, more deadly. 17 vessels, Zalbeth reported, her voice barely a whisper. "They're matching our formation perfectly. Commander, how did they get Zephyrian technology?" The lead human ship moved closer, and Velthar found himself staring at something that should have been impossible. The vessel's hull bore scars from recent construction, as if it had been built in tremendous haste, but every line spoke of deadly purpose. Weapon ports that had been carved into the metal with industrial tools now housed energy cannons of obvious Zephyrian design. The communication array crackled to life, and a face appeared on screen that made Velthar step backward in shock. "Captain." Hansel looked back at him, his features scarred by burns and his left eye replaced with what appeared to be salvaged Zephyrian optical technology. The human should have been dead. incinerated with his colony ship. "Hello again, Commander," Hansol said calmly, his modified eye glowing with cold light. "You wanted to hunt us. Now we hunt you." "This is impossible," Velthar snarled. "Your ship was destroyed. I watched it burn." Hansol's scarred face showed no emotion. "You destroyed one ship. We humans have a saying, cut off one head and two more take its place. Did you really think the new Busan was alone out here?" Behind Hansol, Velthar could see the human ship's bridge. It was a strange mixture of human engineering and salvaged Zephyrian technology, jury-rigged together with the same desperate creativity that had made the colony ship so dangerous. But this wasn't desperate anymore. This was calculated, purposeful, deadly. "The evacuation pods," Velthar whispered in realization. During the battle, several small craft had been launched from the new Busan before its destruction. His forces had assumed they were fleeing civilians and had ignored them. "You let some of your people escape." "More than some," Hansol replied, "and they brought with them everything we learned about your ships, your weapons, your technology." 2 weeks, Commander. That's all we needed to reverse engineer your systems and build something better. The human fleet began to spread out, their movements precise and coordinated. But they weren't forming for a direct assault. Instead, they scattered in all directions, each ship taking a different vector that would carry them deep into Zephyrian space. "You're not staying to fight?" Velthar asked, confused by the human tactics. Hansol smiled, and it was the expression of a predator who had cornered its prey. "We learned something from you during our last encounter. You don't fight wars to prove your strength. You fight them to win, so we're going to do this the human way." The human ships began disappearing one by one, jumping back into hyperspace as quickly as they had arrived. But their parting message was clear. This was not a retreat. It was the beginning of something far worse. Over the following days, reports began flooding in from across Zephyrian space. Supply convoys attacked by unknown vessels that struck without warning and vanished before reinforcements could arrive. Communication relays found destroyed by precision strikes that severed connection between Zephyrian worlds. Isolated outposts, simply going silent. Their automated distress beacons the only evidence that they had ever existed. The human ships were everywhere and nowhere, hitting targets across dozens of star systems simultaneously. They moved through hyperspace with impossible speed and precision, as if they had somehow learned to track Zephyrian fleet movements in real time. Colonel Min Ho appeared in intercepted transmissions, his face grim as he coordinated strikes from what appeared to be a mobile command center built inside an asteroid. Chief Engineer So Young was seen in surveillance footage from a destroyed weapons depot, her team systematically dismantling Zephyrian technology and loading it onto human transports. But it was Lieutenant Yujin who proved most terrifying of all. Her voice could be heard on Zephyrian emergency frequencies, calmly reading out the locations and defensive capabilities of military installations that should have been impossible for humans to know about. Somehow she had turned their own communication networks against them. "They're not trying to defeat us in battle," Velthar realized as he studied the tactical reports. "They're learning from us. Every attack teaches them more about our technology, our tactics, our weaknesses. The humans weren't fighting a war. They were conducting an education, and with each lesson they became more dangerous." 3 Zephyrian colonies had already gone silent. Not destroyed in battle, but simply empty. The humans had evacuated the populations to unknown locations and stripped the facilities of anything useful. When Zephyrian forces arrived to investigate, they found only abandoned worlds and carefully placed messages. "You wanted to hunt us. Now you know how it feels to be prey." Velthar stood on his bridge, watching the stars and wondering what was out there in the darkness. Somewhere in that void, human ships were moving, learning, growing, stronger with each passing day. They had taken his technology and made it better. They had studied his tactics and found the flaws. They had turned his own strategy of overwhelming force into a weapon aimed at the heart of the Zephyrian Empire. The hunters had become the hunted, and Velthar was beginning to understand why the Vorthak had left those desperate warnings in there. Crystal archives. The humans were coming, and they would never stop. The great chamber of the Zephyrian High Council had never seen such chaos. Holographic displays flickered with urgent reports from across the Empire, while council members shouted over each other in panic. Red warning lights bathed the ancient hall as fleet commanders appeared on communication screens, their faces twisted with fear and confusion. Elder Mordan stood at the center of it all, his aged form trembling not from weakness, but from the terrible knowledge he carried. Around him, the most powerful beings in the galaxy argued like frightened children, while their civilization crumbled. 17 outposts destroyed in the Kepler sector, Admiral Zekthar reported from his command ship. Plasma burns visible on his uniform. The humans struck simultaneously across 4 star systems. We never saw them coming. The mining colonies in Sector 9 have gone silent, another commander added. When we sent a patrol to investigate, we found the facilities completely stripped. Every piece of useful technology gone. Populations vanished without a trace. Council Leader Velnoth paced the chamber floor, his 6 legs clicking against the polished stone. This is impossible. How can one primitive species coordinate attacks across our entire territory? They're barely out of their home system. That's what you don't understand, Mordan said quietly, but his voice carried across the chamber with the weight of absolute certainty. They're not one species anymore. They're something else, something the galaxy has seen before. The arguing stopped. As every eye turned to the ancient scholar, Mordan activated the central holographic display, and the chamber filled with images from the Vorthak archives, the same crystal records that Commander Velthar had dismissed weeks ago. The ancient warnings were clear. Mordan's voice rose above the din. The Vorthak called them persistence hunters, a species that never stops pursuing prey once the hunt begins. The hologram showed primitive humans from thousands of years ago, chasing massive beasts across frozen plains with nothing but simple spears and endless determination. But the images shifted, showing the same species adapted to different worlds, different environments, different challenges. Look at them, Mordan continued, pointing to the display. On their homeworld, they hunted creatures 10 times their size by following them for days, weeks, never giving up until their prey collapsed from exhaustion. In space, they do the same thing to entire civilizations. Council Leader Velnoth scoffed, his mandibles clicking with nervous energy. You speak of legends, old one. Primitive hunting techniques cannot threaten a galactic empire. Not legends. Mordan slammed his staff against the floor, the sound echoing through the chamber like a gunshot. The holographic display expanded, showing the complete Vorthak records. 8 centuries of desperate reports, failed strategies, and growing terror. The humans hunted the Vorthak for 800 years across half the galaxy, Mordan continued, his voice heavy with the weight of history. Every time the Vorthak thought they were safe, humans appeared. They adapt to any environment, learn any technology, and pursue their enemies unto death itself. The chamber fell silent as the horrifying scope of the Vorthak records became clear. This wasn't a recent phenomenon. Humans had been doing this for millennia. The hologram showed star maps spanning centuries, tracking the slow but relentless expansion of human influence as they systematically hunted down every Vorthak stronghold. Watch, Mordan commanded, and the display began showing tactical reports from ancient Vorthak commanders. At first, the humans used simple chemical rockets and kinetic weapons. The Vorthak laughed at them just as we did. But look what happened. Next, the timeline accelerated, showing human technology evolving at impossible speed. Within decades, they were matching Vorthak energy weapons. Within a century, they were improving upon them. Every defeat taught them something new. Every captured piece of technology became the foundation for the next advancement. They don't just copy, Mordan explained, as the records showed human ships that bore only superficial resemblance to their Vorthak counterparts. They improve, they adapt. They make everything better than the original. Admiral Zekthar leaned forward in his communication screen, studying the ancient records with growing alarm. These tactical reports, the hit-and-run attacks, the simultaneous strikes across multiple systems, the psychological warfare, it's exactly what they're doing to us now. Because it works, Mordan replied grimly. The Vorthak tried everything. Direct confrontation, superior numbers, advanced technology, even attempted genocide. Nothing stopped the humans. Every strategy the Vorthak developed, the humans learned to counter. Every weapon they built, the humans found ways to turn against them. The holographic display showed the final years of the Vorthak Empire. Once mighty fleets reduced to scattered refugees, proud civilizations becoming nomadic survivors, an entire species slowly ground down by relentless pursuit across the stars. They evacuated their homeworld 7 times, Morden continued, his voice barely above a whisper. Each time they thought they had finally escaped to safety. Each time human ships appeared in their skies. The humans trekked them through hyperspace itself, followed them to the edge of the galaxy and beyond. Council leader Velnoth's voice cracked with desperate hope. But surely they can be negotiated with, reasoned with. What do they want? Mordan's ancient eyes held only despair as he pointed to the final Vorthak transmission, a message recorded as their last city burned around them. They tried negotiation. The humans wouldn't listen. They tried surrender. The humans wouldn't accept it. They tried offering tribute, technology, even their own children as hostages. Nothing worked, because you cannot negotiate with a force of nature. You cannot reason with the tide or bargain with gravity. The chamber erupted again as the implications became clear. This wasn't a war they could win through military might or diplomatic maneuvering. This was an extinction event, as inevitable as a plague or a natural disaster. How do we stop them? Velnoth whispered, the question that everyone was thinking, but afraid to ask. Morden looked around the chamber at the most powerful beings in the Zephyrian Empire and slowly shook his head. The Vorthak tried everything: overwhelming force, advanced technology, biological weapons, artificial plagues, stellar engineering. They even tried to collapse suns to stop human advancement. Nothing worked. He activated a final section of the Vorthak archives, showing recorded testimony from their greatest military minds, their most brilliant scientists, their wisest philosophers. All of them reached the same conclusion. You cannot stop what will not yield, Morden said with finality. The humans are not fighting for resources or territory or political advantage. They are fighting for survival, for the right to exist, for their families and their future. And a species fighting for survival will do anything, sacrifice anything, become anything necessary to ensure their continuation. The holographic display showed the final image from the Vorthak records, human colonies spreading across the galaxy, like wildfire, their ships moving between the stars with the same patient determination their ancestors had shown when hunting mammoths across frozen plains. We have awakened something that should have been left alone, Mordan concluded, and now it hunts us across the stars, just as it hunted the Vorthak. The only question is whether we will learn from their mistake before it's too late. But looking around the chamber at the panicked faces of the High Council, Mordan already knew the answer. The Zephyrians would make the same choices as the Vorthak, follow the same failed strategies, and meet the same inevitable end, because that's what the humans were counting on. 2 years had passed since the first human colony ship burned in space, and the galaxy had learned to fear the darkness between stars. Commander Velthar stood alone on the bridge of his flagship, Dominion's Edge, the last surviving vessel of what had once been the mighty Zephyrian Empire. Through the cracked viewscreen, he watched his homeworld die. Zephyria Prime blazed like a dying star as human hunter-killer fleets moved through its orbital defenses with surgical precision. The planet that had birthed an empire spanning 47 worlds now served as a funeral pyre for billions of his people. The great crystal spires that had reached toward the heavens for millennia crumbled under precision strikes from weapons that had once been Zephyrian technology, now improved beyond recognition. Hull breach on Deck 7, his dying ship's computer announced in a flat, emotionless voice. Atmosphere venting, structural integrity at 12%. Velthar ignored the warnings. His crew was gone, his fleet destroyed, his empire reduced to radioactive debris drifting through space. The humans had come, just as the ancient Vorthak warnings had predicted, and they had brought with them the patience of extinction itself. Incoming transmission, the computer continued. Origin, human command vessel, New Terra. The communication screen flickered to life, and Velthar found himself staring at faces that had haunted his nightmares for 2 years. Captain Hansol appeared first, his scarred features calm and composed, the cybernetic eye that replaced his original one glowing with cold light. Behind him stood Admiral Yu-jin, her uniform bearing the insignia of the newly formed Human Defense Fleet, and Admiral So-young, whose engineering genius had turned stolen Zephyrian technology into weapons of unprecedented destruction. The humans had spent 2 years reverse engineering everything they had captured, building an unstoppable war machine from the ashes of their murdered colonies. Their ships now moved through space with grace that surpassed Zephyrian design, powered by reactors that generated more energy than should have been possible, armed with weapons that could crack moons. "Commander Velthar," Han Sol said, his voice carrying the weight of absolute authority. "This is your final opportunity to surrender." Velthar laughed bitterly, the sound echoing through his empty bridge. "Surrender? You've already destroyed everything. My fleets are gone, my worlds are burning, my people are extinct. What more do you want?" "Justice," Admiral Yu-jin replied simply. "You came to our homes uninvited. You murdered families who had never harmed you. You turned children into slaves and parents into corpses. Did you think there would be no consequences?" "Please," Velthar begged, his pride finally cracking under the weight of his civilization's destruction. "We surrender completely. We'll leave your space forever. We'll retreat to the outer rim and never return. Just let the survivors live." Han Sol's expression didn't change. Behind him, the bridge of the human command ship hummed with activity as officers coordinated the systematic dismantling of Zephyrian civilization. These weren't the desperate colonists he had faced 2 years ago. These were the evolved descendants of that conflict, hardened by war and transformed by necessity into something the galaxy had never seen before. "Too late," Han Sol replied with the finality of a closing grave. "You came to our homes. You killed our families. You threatened our children. Now we follow you to yours." Through the communication link, Velthar could see displays showing the scope of human operations across the galaxy. Dozens of star systems where Zephyrian colonies had once thrived now showed only empty space and memorial beacons. The humans hadn't just defeated the Zephyrian Empire, they had erased it from existence with the thoroughness of a surgical procedure. "This isn't conquest," Velthar realized with growing horror. "You're not taking our territory or enslaving our people, you're just ending us." Admiral So-young stepped forward, her eyes hard as stellar iron. "We learned something during the siege of the New Busan. Some threats can't be negotiated with, can't be reasoned with, can't be allowed to exist. You proved that when you murdered civilians who tried to surrender." The human fleets moved with the coordinated precision of a single organism, their ships flowing around the dying Zephyrian homeworld like antibodies destroying an infection. Every movement was calculated, every strike precisely targeted to maximize psychological impact while minimizing their own losses. Velthar understood now why the Vorthak warnings had spoken of humans with such desperate terror. They didn't conquer for resources or territory or political advantage. They hunted for principle, driven by a code of ethics that demanded absolute justice for crimes against their kind. An attack on one human was an attack on all humans, and they would pursue their enemies across the galaxy itself until that debt was paid in full. "You're monsters," he whispered. "No," Han Sol replied calmly. "We're human, and you taught us what that means." The Dominion's edge shuddered as another section of hull plating tore away, venting atmosphere and debris into the void. Emergency lights flickered and died as power systems failed one by one. Through the gaps in his ship's armor, Velthar could see human vessels moving past like sharks in deep water, their weapons charging for the final strike. "Wait," he called out desperately. "The other species, the ones we conquered before you, surely they deserve to be free. Surely you can show them mercy." Admiral Yu-jin consulted a data tablet before responding. "The Kelari have been liberated and offered protectorate status. The Morthak colonies have been returned to their original owners. The Traxian refugees have been relocated to suitable worlds in the Andromeda sector. Every species you enslaved has been freed. Except us," Velthar realized. "Except you," she confirmed. "Because they were victims, you were the perpetrators." The distinction was absolute, final, and terrifying in its simplicity. The humans had spent 2 years not just fighting a war, but conducting a galaxy-wide investigation into Zephyrian crimes. They had documented every atrocity, interviewed every survivor, catalogued every injustice, and they had judged the Zephyrian Empire guilty of crimes that demanded the ultimate penalty. As his ship's hull began to crack and atmosphere vented into space, Velthar managed to activate his long-range communications array one final time. If he was going to die, he would at least warn the galaxy about what was coming. To all who hear this transmission, he broadcast on all frequencies, his voice carrying across the void to any species that might be listening. I am Commander Velthar of the Zephyrian Empire, and this is my final warning. Beware the humans. They are not conquerors seeking territory or resources. They are not politicians playing games of power. They are the eternal hunt itself, justice. Given form and purpose, the communication array sparked and died, but Velthar continued speaking into the void, hoping someone, somewhere, would learn from his civilization's mistake. They do not negotiate. They do not compromise. They do not forgive. Once awakened, they will pursue you across the galaxy itself, through hyperspace and time until justice is done. They are patient as geology, relentless as entropy, and they will never ever stop coming. The final human torpedo struck the Dominion's edge, precisely at its reactor core, and Commander Velthar vanished in a brief nova of nuclear fire. His last transmission cut to static, but the message had already begun spreading across the galaxy's communication networks. Across the void, human ships continued their patient work, methodically hunting down the last scattered remnants of Zephyrian civilization. They moved between the stars with the same determination their ancestors had shown when tracking wounded prey across frozen plains, never hurrying, never resting, never giving up until the hunt was complete. The galaxy had learned a new truth. Humanity could be peaceful neighbors or implacable hunters, depending entirely on how they were treated. And for those who chose violence against human families, there would be no mercy, no negotiation, and no escape. The hunt would continue until justice was done, even if it took them to the edge of the universe itself. The end